It was supposed to be the last bonfire of summer, August 15th, 1992, a Saturday night in Granger Hollow, a sleepy town folded between dense pines and forgotten railroad tracks in northern Oregon, the kind of town where porch lights flicker late, where everyone knows your last name and nothing ever really happens. Except that night, something did. Something that would ripple through time and memory, leaving scars too deep to measure. That night, 3 boys, Tommy Mays, Jordan Halpern, and Isaac Velez, vanished without a trace. They were 17, full of plans and half-grown mustaches, the kind of kids who walked with too much swagger and not enough fear. Friends since middle school. They laughed too loud, stayed out too late, and made promises to each other the way only boys on the edge of adulthood do. Like time would never catch them. They weren't wild kids. They weren't troubled. They weren't the kind of names whispered behind closed doors. They were just ordinary. Good grades, pickup basketball, guitar lessons. One of them worked at the gas station. Another helped his dad fix up a boat. But that night, they weren't thinking about chores or school or next week's schedule. That night, they were thinking about firelight and stories, about a girl who might show up, about the sky so big it felt like it could swallow them whole. The field they picked was just off Hunter's Road, an old plot once used for lumber, long since abandoned. Overgrown brush tangled the edges. There was a dirt path that curled like a ribbon through the trees, only known to kids and deer. They had been there before. It was their spot. Hidden, but not unsafe. Not then. They built the fire just before dusk. Dry wood snapped like bones in their hands, and the flames caught quick. They brought folding chairs, a crate of soda, 2 bags of chips, a worn deck of cards, and Tommy's Polaroid camera, nearly out of film. The last few pictures would matter more than anyone could imagine. Jordan arrived first, his car stereo still playing when he parked, then Tommy, then Isaac, who came by bike, his wheels squeaking from rust. The 3 of them joked about growing old, about who'd be bald first, about leaving Granger Hollow forever. Someone, maybe Tommy, said they should bury a time capsule. "We'll dig it up when we're rich and famous." He laughed, but no one brought a shovel. Instead, they carved their initials into the nearest oak. Just 3 letters, stacked like a badge. T.J.I. A few other kids showed up. Some left early. A girl named Megan Jenkins remembered seeing them sitting close to the flames just before 10. She took a photo with Tommy's camera, one of the last. The picture showed the boys smiling. Tommy held up a soda can like a trophy. Jordan's hand made a peace sign. Isaac looked like he was mid-laugh. Nothing sinister, nothing strange, just boys being boys. By 11:30 p.m., the fire had burned low. The other teens had gone home. One boy said he saw Tommy grab his camera and sling on his backpack. They talked about walking to the old trail by Miller's Creek. A shortcut home, rarely used, always muddy, but faster. That was the last time anyone saw them. No one heard screams. No one saw headlights. There was no struggle, no overturned chairs, just the crackle of dying embers and a silence that would settle over the town like a cold wind. When the boys didn't come home that night, their parents weren't alarmed at first. Curfews had been stretched that summer, rules bent. Maybe they crashed at a friend's house. Maybe they were watching movies, but by dawn, panic bloomed like frost. Tommy's mom called Jordan's. Isaac's father drove to the gas station, just in case he'd shown up early for work. Nothing. No footprints on the trail, no bike at the park. The fire pit was found the next morning, cold, collapsed, the logs sunken like tired shoulders. A single folding chair remained, tilted sideways in the dirt. Megan's Polaroid had been left behind in Tommy's backpack, which someone had tossed into the brush. its zipper, broken, one strap torn. The film pack inside was empty. That detail would haunt investigators for years. How did the camera get separated from him? Why take the photos, but not the evidence? It rained the next day. Not hard, but enough to wash away tracks. The search began within hours. Volunteers combed the trail near Miller's Creek. Dogs sniffed for scent. Helicopters circled the woods, their blades chopping the silence into pieces. Nothing turned up. No torn clothes, no footprints, no signs of a scuffle or accident. Not even Jordan's car keys, which his mother swore he never left behind. It was as if the boys had been lifted from the earth, erased like pencil lines on a forgotten page. The sheriff, a heavy-set man with tired eyes named Rick Dobbins, told reporters they had no leads, no suspects, and no reason to believe foul play, but also no reason to rule it out. His voice cracked mid-sentence. The town stopped sleeping. Lights stayed on longer. Doors were double-locked. Parents pulled their kids from bonfires and campouts. Teenagers whispered about spirits in the woods. Others said there were tunnels under the creek from logging days long ago. Rumors grew like ivy, but none reached the truth. And still, the woods kept their silence. The initial search lasted 5 days, 5 agonizing, unrelenting days. Boats dragged the creek. Divers checked every shadow. The fire pit was sifted through inch by inch. All they found was ash, a bent soda can, and a melted film wrapper. Granger Hollow, a place where nothing ever happened, had lost 3 of its sons in a single night. No goodbye, no explanation, just smoke and questions and a feeling that something had been missed, or something small but important. Some detail nobody saw because they weren't supposed to. 18 years later, it would finally begin to make sense. But by then, the pain had settled so deep, the truth might never fully be welcomed. Because sometimes even the answers come too late. The first hours after sunrise felt like any other morning. The town stirred slowly. Church bells rang at St. Marlo's for early service, and the breeze carried the scent of wet pine and cut grass. But behind closed windows, something was already beginning to unravel. In 3 separate houses, phones rang into silence. Tommy's mom, Janice Mays, had tried calling Jordan's line just after 7 a.m., expecting the boys had stayed there after the bonfire. She let it ring 6 times, waited, then hung up. She tried again 30 minutes later, then again. By 8:20, her hands trembled as she clutched the kitchen counter, staring at the untouched cereal bowl on the table, and the note Tommy had left the night before. Out with the guys. Back late. Don't wait up. It was written in blue ink. His casual scrawl unmistakable. She pressed the note to her chest as if it could somehow still be warm. At the Halpern house, Jordan's dad, Alan, paced the front porch in his slippers, his mouth drawn in a tight line. He kept glancing at the end of the street, expecting to hear the sound of his son's old truck sputtering up the hill. When his wife asked him to sit, he snapped, "I told him to be home by midnight." She didn't reply. She just stared at the streetlight still buzzing faintly in the morning glare. Across town, Isaac's mother had already called the sheriff's department. She didn't wait. She didn't reason it out. She knew. A mother always knows. She said the words plainly, without drama. "My son is missing. He never came home." The dispatcher, a young woman named Tara, tried to keep her voice steady. She typed the details into her system and sent a ping to the morning deputy, who was still finishing his coffee. By 9 a.m., word had spread. In a town like Granger Hollow, news doesn't need phones to travel. It rides through post office lines and coffee counters, whispers between neighbors mowing their lawns. The boys didn't come back. Something's wrong. They were at Hunter's Field last night. The name alone, Hunter's Field carried weight. It was the place every parent warned about, not because it was dangerous, but because it was forgotten. No lights, no roads, just acres of silence and brush tucked behind an old logging fence that hadn't been repaired in 30 years. By the time Sheriff Dobbins stepped out of his cruiser near the field's entrance, a small crowd had already gathered. Parents, neighbors, 2 teachers. Megan Jenkins stood with her arms crossed, her mascara smudged, trying to recall if the boys had said anything weird before she left. They were just talking, laughing, she repeated. Nothing seemed wrong. The sheriff didn't wait. He called in the first round of deputies and ordered a search of the area. They found the remains of the bonfire within minutes. The logs were damp now, the ash sticky from the early morning rain. The air smelled of burnt wood and wet earth. A soda can lay crushed near a chair. A backpack, torn open and half buried under pine needles, sat 10 feet from the fire. Inside it, a water bottle, a lighter, 2 pens, a broken pair of sunglasses, and an empty film cartridge from Tommy's Polaroid. That was the first moment Dobbins said he felt something wasn't right. If they left, he told his deputy, why leave the bag? Why leave the camera? By noon, the search widened. A dozen volunteers arrived with boots and gloves, forming a line to comb the trail that ran east toward Miller's Creek. It was a mess of mud and overgrowth, mostly used by deer and local kids trying to sneak cigarettes away from home. It led to the water, then looped back into a smaller game trail that hadn't been mapped in years. Rain had turned the dirt soft, which should have made footprints easy to spot. But there were none. Not even a tire track from Isaac's bike. It was as if the earth had swallowed all evidence whole. Dogs were brought in that afternoon. 2 hounds, 1 golden retriever trained in cadaver detection, sniffed and circled and barked once near the creek's edge. Then nothing. No scent trail, no sign of struggle. Sheriff Dobbins, who had handled missing persons cases before, paced the perimeter with his jaw tight. He wasn't ready to say it, but he was already thinking it. This was different. The parents waited near the tree line, clutching jackets and thermoses, trying not to fall apart. Isaac's mother cried quietly into her scarf. Jordan's dad kept whispering to no one. We'll find them. They're just lost. That's all. Just lost. Janice Mays sat on the tailgate of an old truck, clutching her son's jacket. A boy named Liam, who had left the bonfire early, approached her with trembling hands. He let me take one of the Polaroids, he said, and held out a crumpled photo. In it, the 3 boys stood shoulder to shoulder, all looking off camera, not smiling, not serious, just still, like they were waiting for something. The timestamp scribbled at the bottom read, 11:17 p.m. By 3 p.m., Dobbins had contacted the state troopers. Helicopters would be brought in the next morning. Search grids were drawn on paper maps at the sheriff's office. Circles and arrows and red exclamation points scrawled like battle plans. Every trail, every creek, every cave, opening, and ditch. Nothing would be missed. At least, that's what they told the families. But in the pit of his gut, Dobbins feared it was already too late. Darkness would come by 8, and the forest wasn't kind at night. The temperature dropped quickly. Mist rolled down from the ridges and slithered into the valleys like ghosts. That night, as deputies carried flashlights through underbrush and voices echoed through the woods calling out names, the town held its breath. Porch lights stayed on, radios hummed in kitchens, parents sat by the phone with their heads in their hands. In Granger Hollow, nothing like this had ever happened. Teenagers got grounded, not vanished. Boys snuck out. They didn't disappear. But now, with every unanswered call, With every dog that circled back empty, with every new volunteer returning with nothing to report, fear began to grow in ways no one could contain. Not fear of a bear, not even fear of death. Something worse, fear of not knowing, of a silence that wouldn't be explained. The next morning would bring headlines, reporters, and more theories than the sheriff could manage. But on that first full day, Sunday, August 16th, the town still believed it could end well. That the boys would walk out of the woods, dirty and tired, full of apologies and teenage excuses. That maybe they had gotten lost, or hurt, or caught in the rain. The hope was still stronger than the dread, but not for long. By Monday morning, Granger Hollow was no longer just a quiet town nestled between evergreens. It was a map of red flags, dog tracks, footprints that led nowhere, and unanswered prayers before the school bell ever rang. Before the sun had fully dried the dew from the rooftops, dozens of people were already in the woods. It wasn't just the sheriff's department anymore. It was fathers, uncles, teachers, and mechanics. Teenagers too. Some barely older than the boys they were looking for. They brought flashlights, shovels, bottles of water, and hope. But that hope, so full and stubborn at first, began to fray as the hours ticked by. They searched along the trail toward Miller's Creek, through the low brush near the fire pit, up the steeper inclines that led to the abandoned logging paths. They called the boys' names until their voices cracked. Tommy, Jordan, Isaac, again and again. Over the river's churn, through the whistle of the pine. But the forest gave nothing back. State troopers arrived by 9 a.m., their boots too new and their questions too sharp. They set up a base at the ranger outpost near the edge of town, folding tables, two-way radios, a hand-drawn map with pins that marked the last known locations. The bonfire, the trailhead, a spot near the creek where the scent dogs had stopped and circled, then wandered off confused. A few volunteers claimed they saw something strange. A boot print near a hollow stump. A torn piece of shirt caught on a branch, but none of it amounted to much. Every lead dissolved under scrutiny, like mist fading in the sun. Sheriff Dobbins, who had barely slept, kept circling back to the same question. If they got lost, where's the trail? If they ran, why leave their things? And if someone took them, how did no one hear a thing? The forest became a canvas of desperate movements. Search lines moved in 5-foot intervals, combing every inch of brush. Helicopters arrived just after noon, slicing through the sky with a mechanical thrum that sent flocks scattering from the treetops. From above, the world looked deceptively calm, a patchwork of green, undisturbed. But down below, it was a different story. Sweat-soaked shirts, twigs snapping underfoot, radios crackling with static, and short commands. Every snapped branch could be a clue. Every overturned rock, a possible sign. But the forest was a trickster. It offered illusions, false hope, dozens of possible trails. It mirrored itself over and over again. One searcher, a retired firefighter named Greg Banner, summed it up best. These woods aren't empty. They're just quiet in a way that feels wrong. By nightfall, the search had expanded 10 miles in every direction. Sheriff Dobbins sent deputies to question everyone who had attended the bonfire. Megan Jenkins came back again, this time with tears on her cheeks. They didn't say anything weird. We were all laughing, she repeated. She showed them a second Polaroid, one she'd stuffed into her jacket pocket that night and forgotten until now. It showed the 3 boys standing side by side in front of the fire. In the background, deeper in the woods, something odd appeared, a blurry shape, too tall to be a person, or maybe just the shadow of a tree, but it was enough to cause a stir. The photo was taken into evidence. Investigators asked Megan, "Do you remember anyone else being there? Anyone you didn't recognize?" She shook her head. "Just us, just them." On Tuesday, Cadaver dogs were flown in from Portland. They were more experienced, trained to find bodies even through water or snow. They sniffed every trail, every cave mouth, every hollow log, every bend in the creek. One dog barked near an old tree, its trunk hollowed by rot. Inside, they found a raccoon nest, nothing more. Another dog froze near the ravine that fed into Miller's Creek. A team of volunteers climbed down, inching their way with ropes and harnesses. They found 2 soda cans, both rusted, one from 1989, the other unreadable. The search continued. By Wednesday, news vans arrived, reporters from Salem and Eugene, camera crews eager for shots of the search parties, microphones shoved in front of grieving parents. Janice Mays refused to speak. She stayed curled in a folding chair near the sheriff's table, her eyes fixed on the woods like she could will them to give her son back. Jordan's father, Alan, finally agreed to an interview. His voice was hoarse. They didn't run away. They're good boys. They'd never do this. Somebody knows something. Somebody saw something. The clip aired that night. It sparked a flood of calls, tips, leads, none useful. Theories began to sprout like weeds. Some believed the boys had fallen into a ravine. Others thought they had drowned in the creek. A few whispered about old logging tunnels rumored to run beneath the hills, sealed decades ago, but maybe not entirely. One caller claimed to have seen headlights in the woods that night. Another said she heard a scream. Sheriff Dobbins chased down every story. Most fell apart within minutes. But the problem wasn't the false leads. It was the silence, the vast space between clues, the emptiness that stretched like a chasm between their last known sighting and nothing. The town began to feel it, the heaviness, the shift. Churches held candlelight vigils. Ribbons were tied to lampposts. Red for Isaac, green for Jordan, blue for Tommy. Photos of the boys were taped to storefronts, gas pumps, and school doors. Missing, the posters said. Please help us find our boys. Teachers spoke in hushed tones. Parents began keeping their kids indoors. Bonfires were canceled. Sleepovers postponed. Even the woods themselves seemed to change. Darker somehow, as if they too had taken on the burden of unanswered questions. By Friday, the sheriff had brought in divers. Miller's Creek wasn't deep, but it had pockets, places where the current slowed and silt settled. The divers moved like shadows, combing the bed inch by inch. They found old beer bottles, a tire, half of a rusted shopping cart, but nothing human, no clothing, no bones. No watch or wallet or camera. It was as if the boys had vanished into smoke. The search officially continued for 2 more weeks. Unofficially, it never really stopped. Not for the families, not for those who had been there. But the volunteers grew weary. People had to return to work. School was starting. Lives crept forward, even if no one wanted them to. Sheriff Dobbins gave his last press conference on September 2nd. He stood beneath the flagpole at City Hall, eyes hollow. We are continuing to follow every lead, but as of now, we have no confirmed sightings, no evidence of foul play, and no explanation for their disappearance. He paused. We haven't given up, and we won't. But something in his voice told a different story. Something final. The flyers remained up for months. Some faded, some were torn by wind, but others stayed like stubborn ghosts, reminding the town of what it had lost. Granger Hollow had become a place with a hole in its story. A chapter torn out. And nobody could look at the woods the same way again. The first autumn after the disappearance of Tommy Mays, Jordan Halpern, and Isaac Velez arrived like a breath held too long, brittle and cold, smelling of wet leaves and unfinished morning. The trees turned gold, then rust, then bare. And in Granger Hollow, the urgency that once pulsed through every alley and trail began to dissolve into something slower, something more hollow. The search had gone quiet. The reporters packed up. The helicopters stopped circling. One by one, the men with flashlights returned to their jobs and homes. The gear was packed away. Maps were folded, radios stored, and silence, that cruel and aching thing, moved in like fog at the base of the pines. The sheriff's office still had the case pinned to the board in the back room, of course, marked "Open" in red ink. But the photos were curling now. The edges yellowed. Even the ink on the timeline began to fade. Theories, though, those never stopped. Not truly. Not in a town like this. Granger Hollow was the kind of place where truth and memory blurred easily, where a man could see a fox in the night and swear it had glowing eyes, where stories passed through generations like recipes, growing wilder with every retelling. And the boy's disappearance became one of those stories, a wound disguised as a mystery. In diners and hardware stores, people speculated in lowered voices. The working theory changed with the weather. Some believed the boys had gotten lost, a simple, tragic miscalculation. The storm had come in faster than expected. The trails had shifted. The creek had risen. That's what the paper leaned into. Nature's cruelty. Bad luck. A misstep with no villains. But others weren't so sure. There was the stranger theory, a drifter, someone passing through, a man no one knew who'd been seen walking along Hunter's Road a week before the bonfire, wore a long coat despite the heat, someone said, had a limp, walked with his head down. Maybe he saw the fire that night. Maybe he approached the boys. Maybe they let him join them, teenage boys trying to act tough, trusting the wrong man. That version of the story was always whispered, never confirmed. But it lingered in the corners of conversation, waiting. There were more outlandish theories too, that they'd found something they weren't meant to, that the woods were cursed, that there was something under the old trail. Tunnels from the mining days, even a suggestion that the boys had faked it all, staged their disappearance and ran. That theory never stuck long. No money withdrawn, no passports used, no signs of life. They were 17, not spies, but people said it anyway, when they didn't know what else to say. Then came the blame. The town never said it out loud, but it was there, in glances, in silence. Some blamed the parents, said maybe one of the boys had gotten into something they shouldn't. Drugs, girls, secrets. That maybe the other two paid the price. Others blamed the sheriff's department. They waited too long. Didn't bring in the dogs fast enough. Dobbins ignored it, mostly. But his shoulders seemed heavier. His voice quieter. He kept the Polaroid of the boys on his desk. Not for the case, but as a reminder. He once told his deputy, "It's not the unsolved part that hurts. It's the stillness, the not knowing." And that's what Granger Hollow lived with. A not knowing that stretched and curled through time like a shadow that never left. The families carried it differently. Janice Mays, Tommy's mother, kept her son's room untouched, made his bed every morning, dusted his soccer trophies, refilled the batteries in the little alarm clock by his desk, even though it no longer ticked. She wrote him letters in a notebook, hundreds of them. What I made for dinner today. What your sister said at school. The joke Dad told me. As if he'd come back and read them someday. Jordan's father, Alan, grew more withdrawn. He took early retirement from the shipping yard and began walking the trails alone. Every week, same loop, same trailhead, sometimes with a thermos of coffee, sometimes with a radio. He never told anyone what he was looking for or what he hoped to find. He just walked. Isaac's family moved away 2 years later, left a note on their mailbox. Too much memory, not enough mercy. The town eventually began to breathe again. That's the cruel part. Grief fades not because it heals, but because the world moves. New students filled the classrooms. A new sheriff took over when Dobbins retired early for health reasons. High school football returned, though the stadium still bore a plaque in memory of the missing boys. Gone, not forgotten, it read. But truthfully, some had begun to forget. Not the families, not the searchers, but the others, the new teachers, the younger kids, the outsiders who moved into town unaware. Time does that. It softens even the sharpest edges. But every once in a while, something would crack the shell of forgetting. A boy would vanish from another town, and Granger Hollow would remember. A body would be found in a creek somewhere, and the phone at the sheriff's office would ring again. Could it be them? Always, the answer was no. 5 years passed, then 10. On the anniversary each year, the family still gathered at the field, the place where the fire was last lit. They'd bring flowers, candles, old photographs, sometimes just silence. The grass grew taller there now. The trail was nearly overgrown, but the initials the boys had carved into the oak, TJI, were still there, weathered but visible. One year, someone placed 3 small stones beneath the tree. No note, no signature, just 3 stones. The town didn't ask who did it. Some things were better left unspoken. At the 10-year mark, a reporter came from Portland to do a retrospective. Young guy, too eager, asked hard questions in soft tones. Do you think they're still alive? Do you blame the sheriff? If they were here now, what would you say to them? The families declined interviews, but the article ran anyway. Vanished in the pines, a decade of silence. It brought a flicker of attention, a few new tips, a call from someone who claimed to have seen a boy matching Tommy's description hitchhiking in Nevada in 1994. That lead, like all the others, dissolved into static, but it stirred something in the town again, the ache that never truly went away. The sheriff's office reopened the file briefly, reviewed the photos, dusted off the evidence box, but there was nothing new, just silence and paper yellowing in drawers. By the 15th year, the case had become a ghost in Granger Hollow, mentioned only at campfires or late-night drives past Hunter's Road. Kids whispered about it again, turned it into legend. If you say their names 3 times near the oak tree, they'll whisper back. Their ghosts still walk the trail. Teenagers daring each other to go find the fire pit at midnight. Most of it was nonsense, but not all of it, because even now, the woods still held a feeling, an emptiness, a pressure, like something waiting. Then came the 18th year, and with it, something unexpected, something no one saw coming. On a windy Sunday in late October, a woman walking her dog in the southern woods near Hollow Pine Ridge, nearly 7 miles from Hunter's Field, noticed something strange. Her dog, a golden lab named Murphy, began barking at a tall, split tree. Inside the hollow, wedged between roots and damp bark, was something leather, cracked, weather-worn. She pulled it out carefully, unsure if it was animal or trash. It was a wallet, faded brown. Inside, an Oregon State ID card belonging to Jordan Halpern, dated 1992. Alongside it, a faded movie ticket stub, a pressed wildflower, and 3 $20 bills still folded inside. The woman called the sheriff. Within hours, the search was active again. They say memories fade, but all it took was one weather-worn wallet for Granger Hollow to remember everything. The moment word spread about the discovery, it was as if 18 years hadn't passed at all, as if the woods themselves had just now opened their mouth to whisper a secret long buried. The town stirred. People who had long stopped talking about Tommy, Jordan, and Isaac suddenly found themselves pulling up old photos, walking familiar trails, standing at kitchen counters with trembling hands. And for the families, for Janice Mays, for Alan Halpern, For the Velez family, who had long since moved away, it was like being dragged backward through time. The ache never left, but now it flared into something sharp again. Something new. Not hope, exactly. Something more dangerous than that. Possibility. The woman who found the wallet was named Erin Landry. She was a retired nurse, recently moved to Granger Hollow to escape the noise of the city. She hadn't even known the full story until she mentioned her find to a neighbor. "It was just wedged there," she said later, "like it had been hidden on purpose. The dog wouldn't stop barking at it. I almost didn't look. The tree was an old cedar, half dead, split down the middle by time or lightning or both. Inside the hollow, damp moss, a tangle of roots, and the wallet, perfectly lodged as if placed there gently, deliberately. Sheriff Dobbins was long gone by then, having retired quietly to a lake house upstate. But when the current sheriff, Tamara Holt, got the call, she responded in person. She hadn't been more than a deputy in '92. She still remembered the sound Janice Mays made when she first arrived at the field. She'd never forgotten. Holt arrived at the scene with gloves and a heavy heart. The wallet was bagged, labeled, and taken to the sheriff's office. The ID card was unmistakable. Jordan's name, photo, birth date. Still legible after all these years, it felt impossible. Next came the items inside, a movie stub dated August 13th, 1992, 2 days before the disappearance. The flower was pressed between two waxy receipts, brittle and blue, likely a cornflower or wild aster. One deputy recognized it immediately. That's what grows near Miller's Creek. The bills were faded, but intact. All 20s, curiously crisp, like they'd been placed there with care. What wasn't there, however, was just as loud as what was. No credit cards, no personal notes, no blood, no fingerprints that hadn't already degraded beyond clarity. The sheriff's office went into motion quietly at first. They didn't want another media storm, not yet. But in a town like Granger Hollow, news travels faster than facts. By that afternoon, the diner was buzzing. "It's Jordan's wallet." It was in a tree. The search is starting again. The field was cordoned off once more. Deputies walked the new area where the wallet was found, Hollow Pine Ridge, a part of the forest that had been just outside the original search grid in '92. It was denser, more remote, rough terrain, no mapped trails, the perfect place to lose something, or hide it. Janice Mays was the first of the parents to be called. She answered on the second ring. Her voice, soft and unsteady, cracked when they told her. "Jordan's wallet?" she repeated. "But how?" She didn't finish the sentence. Just let out a long breath and said, "Tell me what to do." Sheriff Holt asked her to come in. She did. She brought a shoebox of Tommy's belongings with her, just in case. His pocket knife, a cassette tape, an old scout badge. Things he might have had that night. Alan Halpern showed up next. He had aged considerably, his hair thinner, his back bent, but his eyes were the same, haunted but clear. "I want to see it," he said, and so they did. They laid the wallet out gently, gloved hands turning it open. He stared at it for a long time. "That's his," he whispered. "That's Jordan's." The reopening of the case was quiet but swift. Sheriff Holt assigned 2 detectives, Rachel Glenn and Marcus Duvall, both new to Granger Hollow, both outsiders. She believed distance might bring clarity. "No ghosts," she told them. "Just facts." They began by tracing the location of the wallet in relation to the original disappearance site. It was over 6 miles from Hunter's Field. A difficult journey on foot, through thick underbrush, steep inclines, and narrow ravines, but not impossible. The detectives hiked it themselves. It took 3 hours. Longer if you were lost. They marked several points along the way: old trees, unusual rocks, and one shallow creek crossing. Halfway through, Duval stopped. "Look at this," he said. A half-buried can tab, weathered and corroded. Rachel noted the GPS coordinates, just in case. Back in town, the news finally broke. Local papers ran the headline, "Wallet found in woods, 18 years after boys vanished." The image was grainy, but clear enough. A photo of the wallet, half open, the ID visible. It sparked a resurgence of attention. Old reporters returned. True crime blogs resurfaced the case. People speculated online. Reddit threads bloomed like wildfire. Was the wallet dropped recently? Why would it be in a tree? Was Jordan alive after that night? Everyone had a theory. Some said he ran. Others suggested foul play. A few wondered if he or the others had tried to return and never made it. But Sheriff Holt remained grounded. She didn't care for theories. She wanted evidence, hard evidence, and she wanted answers before the rumors made it impossible to see straight. She ordered a new search of Hollow Pine Ridge. Volunteers returned, dogs, drones, ground-penetrating radar. The area was combed inch by inch. On the third day, they found something else, near the base of a large boulder, 20 yards from the tree, a charred ring of stones, a fire pit, old, sunken into the moss. At its center, fragments of glass, blackened metal, and a melted plastic fork. Nearby, half buried in dirt, a shoelace, frayed, weathered, still knotted. Forensics dated the glass as early 90s soda bottles. The fork matched those sold in local diners at the time. The shoelace, size and pattern consistent with the sneakers Tommy had been wearing in the last known photo. Sheriff Holt didn't say much to the press, just nodded slowly and said, "We may be getting closer." But in private, she told Duval, this was a campsite, and it wasn't the Bonfire site, which means they moved. Duval finished. They came here after. It was the first real revelation in nearly 2 decades. The boys hadn't vanished into the forest that night. They had walked, together, possibly for miles, and somewhere between the fire and the ridge, something happened. Janice couldn't stop touching the shoelace. She pressed it against her cheek like it still belonged to someone warm. "He knew how to tie double knots," she whispered. That was always his thing, neat knots. She didn't cry. Not yet. But her eyes were full. Alan stood behind her, hands clenched. "They made it this far," he said. "And we left them out there." Sheriff Holt put a hand on his shoulder. "We're going to finish it now," she said quietly. "Whatever's left to find, we'll find it." But not everything wanted to be found. The woods didn't give up everything all at once. They never do. Even when the trees are still, even when the wind is low, the forest holds its secrets tight. As Sheriff Holt's team pushed deeper into Hollow Pine Ridge, it became clear that this area, once thought too remote to matter, had, perhaps, always been the missing piece. The ground was uneven, scarred by time and erosion, and the deeper the volunteers hiked, the more they realized just how little of it had ever been touched. No trail markers, no boot prints in decades, just shadows, thick moss, and the occasional glint of something old beneath the brush. By the 4th day of searching, Detective Rachel Glenn had found 2 cigarette butts, a rusted spoon, and a tangle of cassette tape caught in a thorn bush. None of it confirmed anything, and yet each item pulsed with possibility. She bagged them carefully. "What matters isn't just what we find," she said to Duval, "it's where we find it." Meanwhile, the town began to ache in that old, familiar way. It had been 18 years since Tommy, Jordan, and Isaac had disappeared, and now the possibility, however faint, That they had survived the first night clawed its way back into every conversation. Parents held their children closer. Local news reran old footage. Storefronts printed missing posters again, this time with the added line, "If you remember anything, even the smallest detail, now is the time to come forward." Janice Mays returned to the field where her son was last seen. She stood by the oak tree, the one with the carved initials, and whispered something no one else could hear. Alan Halpern stayed mostly silent, except when asked. "I knew," he said softly. "I always knew they didn't die right away. A parent knows. You feel it, like a thread that never snaps." The Velez family, who had moved to Washington years ago, drove back into town and stood outside the sheriff's department for nearly 20 minutes before going inside. Isaac's mother wore a pendant with his photo inside. She didn't say a word the entire visit. As the investigation continued, more strange details emerged. The shoelace had a knot pattern rarely seen, the kind used in hiking or search and rescue training, not something a teenager would typically know. And yet, it was Isaac's shoe brand. So either he learned to tie like that, or someone else had tied it for him. The melted plastic fork, after lab analysis, revealed traces of food, likely beans or canned stew. Something heated, something shared. It meant they had eaten again. Sometime after the bonfire, after the storm began. The pieces didn't just hint at survival. They hinted at movement, strategy, desperation. The boys didn't vanish. They fought to live. That realization, more than anything, rattled the town. The narrative had always been tragedy. Now it was endurance. What if they had survived that first night, injured, cold, trying to find a way home? What if they had found shelter and still something got to them? The idea was unbearable. It shifted the weight of grief. It turned it into something jagged. Families wondered aloud, what if we had searched 1 mile further? What if the search grid had just been wider? What if someone had heard them and didn't listen? Detective Duval dug through the original 1992 case files and found something buried in an old typed report, a single line from a ranger who had volunteered in the original search. It read, "Unusual structure seen near ridge. Looked like an old hunting blind or shack. Did not enter. Marked location." But there was no follow-up, no coordinates, just a memory, lost in the chaos. Duval brought the note to Holt, who immediately called for a fresh aerial scan of the area using LiDAR, a laser-based mapping technology that could pierce through tree canopies and see beneath dense foliage. The scan results arrived 2 days later. Near the top of Hollow Pine Ridge, just beyond the old cedar tree, the system detected a rectangular indentation in the ground, approximately 9 by 6 feet. Not a natural formation, possibly man-made, possibly collapsed. The sheriff's team hiked there the next morning. What they found was barely visible. A cluster of rotted wooden beams half buried in leaves, the remnants of a wall, a rusted hinge, but beneath that, after careful excavation, was a structure, a small dugout, not a cabin exactly, not even a proper bunker, but a shelter. The kind someone might build in desperation. Inside were fragments of tarp, broken wood, a cracked flashlight, and, buried beneath a layer of dirt, a denim jacket. It was moldy, frayed, but inside the left pocket was a library card. Granger Hollow High School, the name printed, Isaac Velez. No one spoke for a long time after that. Forensic teams arrived within hours. The shelter was carefully documented. It was likely built long before 1992, maybe by hunters or hikers who knew how to live off-grid. But what mattered now was that someone had used it recently, at least in the time following the boys' disappearance. The air inside was dry. The moss was dead in patches. It had been opened, moved through. The presence of the library card placed Isaac there. At least, briefly. Sheriff Holt walked through the site slowly, kneeling to pick up each object with care. "They were here," she whispered. "They made it this far." And then came the most haunting discovery yet. Behind the shelter, tucked between two boulders, searchers found a plastic sandwich bag, the kind used for lunches, filled with paper, torn notebook scraps, faded, streaked by moisture, but still readable. The words, shaky but legible, said, "August 17th, cold. We don't know where we are, can't hear the road. Isaac twisted his ankle. We're staying here tonight. August 18th. Still no help. Something was in the woods last night. Could have been an animal. We're out of food. August 19th. Jordan says he heard someone calling. Tommy doesn't believe it. We're scared to leave. August 20th. Wind is worse. Something's not right if we don't get help soon. August 21st. If someone finds this, tell them we didn't give up. It was unsigned, but the writing matched Tommy's handwriting from school essays, confirmed by his mother. The last entry was a punch to the chest. Back in town, Sheriff Holt called a private meeting with the families. No press, no cameras, just the truth. They laid out the items, the bag, the notes, the jacket, the photos. They read the words aloud, and the silence that followed was thicker than grief. Janice held her face in her hands. Alan turned away. Isaac's mother clutched the paper like it was his heartbeat. The note didn't tell them everything, but it told them enough. Their sons were brave. They fought. They waited. They hoped. They hadn't vanished in fear. They vanished in the dark. In the weeks that followed the discovery of the shelter and the desperate notes, the mood in Granger Hollow shifted from grief to obsession. Everyone felt it, the pull of something unfinished. There was no peace. Not yet. Not even with evidence in hand. Because what the notes revealed was not closure, but a bigger, darker question. If the boys were alive for at least 5 days after they disappeared, if they had shelter and wrote that final plea, then what exactly stopped them from coming home? What ended their trail in that patch of forest without leaving so much as a footprint beyond the edge of the dugout? Sheriff Holt stopped calling it an investigation. She began calling it what it had always been, a search for the missing, not just the lost. And the difference mattered now more than ever. The forensic team processed the shelter thoroughly. Soil samples, insect activity, bark indentations on surrounding trees. A buried tin can was unearthed behind the rocks. Inside it, a handful of coins, a dog tag with no name, and a crumpled receipt from a gas station 3 towns away, dated August 15th, 1992, the day of the bonfire. It wasn't definitive, but it added to a timeline growing stranger by the day. Then came the discovery that changed everything again. While clearing a small area near the collapsed wall of the shelter, Duval noticed something odd. A strip of film, half charred, sticking out from between 2 stones. Rachel Glenn carefully removed it, bagged it, and took it back for digital analysis. The strip held just enough image to be enhanced, not fully, not cleanly, but enough to recognize shapes and faces. 3 figures, one clearly Jordan, the other 2 likely Tommy and Isaac. All 3 were inside the shelter. All 3 looked directly at the camera. Tommy held up a piece of paper, likely one of the notes found in the plastic bag. Isaac, though blurred, seemed to be pointing at something off frame. But what unsettled investigators was the edge of the frame, just barely visible. A 4th shape, faint, pale, could have been a reflection, could have been damage, or, and this is what no one wanted to say, it could have been someone else. Someone just out of view. Sheriff Holt called in specialists to examine the photo. They ruled out double exposure, ruled out flash interference. What they couldn't rule out was the possibility that someone else had been there near the boys during those final hours. It was enough to reopen every old theory. Someone had followed them, someone had watched them, or someone had found them and left them. The notes had said it plainly. We heard something in the woods, not sure if it was help or not. Someone was calling. The phrase that repeated itself in Tommy's final scrawl, "We didn't give up," felt less like reassurance now and more like warning. The town began whispering again about the man seen near the creek in '92, about the rumor of a reclusive veteran who had once lived in the woods, about the silent watcher Megan Jenkins had mentioned all those years ago, the figure near the firelight, too tall to be anyone she knew. Even people who had stopped believing in monsters began to wonder if something human, but dark, had found those boys. The sheriff ordered a full sweep of the entire ridge beyond the shelter, a 100-acre perimeter, not just for clues, but for danger, for whatever might have once been there or still was. The team searched everything: hollow trees, storm shelters, abandoned mining shafts. They uncovered bones, animal, rusted tools, a broken camp chair, nothing tied directly to the boys. But the longer they searched, the more the feeling of being watched returned. Deputies mentioned it in passing. It's too quiet. It feels wrong here. Even the dogs hesitated in certain patches. One handler reported her dog freezing for nearly 10 minutes near a split tree trunk before turning away and refusing to go further. It wasn't just imagination. Something in that forest was wrong. And then came the phone call. A woman named Arlene Wakefield lived alone just outside the southern perimeter of Hollow Pine Ridge. She'd lived there since the 1980s, kept to herself. No TV, no computer, just a shortwave radio and a landline. She had heard about the search from a neighbor, and she remembered something. That summer, she said, I heard someone crying. Her voice shook on the recording. More than once. It was always just after dark. I thought it was animals or teenagers playing tricks. But one night I walked to the edge of the trees and I saw something. 3 figures standing by a fire. Small fire. Maybe kids. I wanted to call out, but something stopped me. What stopped you? The deputy had asked. There was someone else, she said, farther back, behind a tree, not moving, just watching them. Arlene's statement reopened every old file, every forgotten tip. One of the searchers from '92 recalled being told to stay away from the eastern ridge by a man they assumed was another ranger. But when they reviewed old ranger logs, no one was supposed to be in that area that day. Sheriff Holt had Rachel Glenn pull the records. One ranger had resigned abruptly 2 weeks after the boys vanished. No explanation, no forwarding address. His name, Ellis Rourke. Rourke had been a forest fire lookout in his early 50s, lived in a cabin off Ridge 23, known for being private, eccentric, carved his own spoons, collected mushrooms, no criminal record, no complaints. But there was one note in his file, vague but chilling. Observed speaking to hikers at length, told to avoid contact, claimed to be guiding them back to safety. No follow-up documented. The team tracked down his last known address. The cabin was long gone, burned in a lightning strike in 2004. But the foundation remained. When Duvall and Glenn hiked to the site, they found what was left: scorched ground, rusted tin cans, broken window glass, and buried beneath the ashes, an old metal lockbox. It was sealed shut. They brought it back to the station. Inside, papers, maps, journal entries, dozens of them, and in one, dated August 18th, 1992, Ellis Rourke wrote, "Heard them again. 3 boys, close, I saw them down by the ridge. They looked scared. I told them to wait near the rocks. Not sure they trust me. One hurt his foot. Not safe to bring them to town. Something out there. Not sure what. Not animals. No sound. Just eyes. The entry ended there. Others followed. Fragmented. Obsessive. But none confirmed what happened next. The families were told. They read the pages. Isaac's mother wept as she whispered, "They found someone. They found help, but they never made it out." Janice clutched one line in Rourke's scribbled notebook. I said I'd come back with food, but when I returned, they were gone. Gone. Again. It was a word the town would never recover from. The lockbox changed everything. It didn't solve the mystery. If anything, it deepened it, but it cracked the case open in a new way. No longer just about 3 boys who vanished, but about a man who may have tried to help and failed. Or perhaps never told the whole truth. Ellis Rourke. His name was now etched into the story like a jagged stone, undeniable. His journals, once scattered pages of odd observations and wilderness notes, became the center of the investigation. Sheriff Holt had every page scanned and analyzed. The entries bounced between coherent thoughts and manic stream of consciousness rambling. Rourke was clearly unraveling by the late 80s. Paranoid about shadows, convinced something unnatural was in the forest, something silent and clever. Most wrote that off as the mental decline of a reclusive man, but what couldn't be written off were the entries from the week the boys vanished. August 15th, 1992. Saw smoke. East Ridge. Kids. Campers. They didn't see me. August 16th. 3. 2 blonde, 1 darker, 1 limping. I said they should stay put. Storm's coming. August 17th. They were still there, hungry, quiet. I left food. Didn't talk much. August 18th. 1 cried at night. The wind carried the sound down, saw lights in the woods. Not mine, not theirs. They were scared. I was too. August 19th. Gone. Gone. Just that word. Scrawled large. Underlined in shaky ink. And then a blank space, as if the pages themselves couldn't bear what came next. The entries after that were disjointed, mentions of storms, sounds at night, firelight, on distant hills. Then silence, no mention of the boys ever again. The news went public. Holt had wanted to keep it quiet, but someone leaked the pages to a reporter from Eugene. Within hours, headlines splashed across screens. Missing boys may have been found, then lost again. Online forums exploded with speculation. Was Rourke a hero or a monster? Did he try to help and fail? Or had he lured the boys in with false promises of safety? No one could say, but one thing was clear. The boys had been alive longer than anyone had dared to believe. They had spoken with someone, accepted food, slept in shelter, left behind notes, and yet they had vanished. Jesse Halpern, Jordan's younger brother, who had been just 10 at the time, returned to Granger Hollow as soon as the news broke. He hadn't set foot in the town in over a decade, had left it behind like an old scar. One. Too deep to touch. But now, he was back. He walked the ridge trail with Sheriff Holt, flashlight in hand, stepping carefully through the underbrush near the site of the dugout shelter. "My brother was here," he whispered. "He was right here." Holt watched him kneel by a cluster of stones. A child once crushed by loss, now a man tracing the footprints of ghosts. It was Jesse who found the next clue. A folded map tucked in a crack of the foundation wall near the collapsed edge of the shelter, water damaged, partially torn, but still legible. A ranger map, one of the old hand-marked ones from the 1980s. And on it, in red ink, a path was traced from the shelter site through Hollow Pine Ridge, bending south, not north toward town, but deep into the forest, past any known trail. At the end of that line, a red X. Just above it, the word scrawled. Safe. Was it something the boys drew? or Rourke. No handwriting analysis could say for sure, but Sheriff Holt had it pinned on the wall of her office, beside the Polaroids, the notes, the shoelace, the wallet. It became the center of everything, a riddle with no legend, a final destination with no known arrival. A week later, the team hiked the path, following the red line. The terrain grew worse as they moved south, thicker trees, steeper climbs, but after nearly 4 hours of climbing, they reached a clearing, natural, unmarked on any satellite scans. And in the center of it, a large boulder shaped like a broken tooth. Behind it, a mound of earth, not quite natural, just slightly raised, as if someone, long ago, had buried something. Or someone. They didn't rush. They brought in a full forensic excavation crew. The families were notified, but kept at a distance. Jesse waited at the trailhead with Isaac's uncle and Tommy's cousin. No one spoke, just the sound of wind through trees and the heavy silence of anticipation. When the soil was removed, they found it, a makeshift grave, inside bones, 3 sets, partial, scattered clothing remnants, a denim jacket, a sneaker sole, a button from a high school Letterman jacket, initials GHHS, and inside a rusted tin near the center, 3 rings, class rings, Granger Hollow High School, class of 1993, each ring engraved inside with a name, Jordan, Isaac, Tommy. The silence at the site was unbearable. The forensic team didn't speak above whispers. Holt stood with her hands in her pockets, staring at the tin box as if it held not just evidence, but sorrow made solid. She didn't cry, but she looked older than she had the day before. The remains were confirmed through DNA in the weeks that followed. There were no signs of trauma, no broken bones, no stab marks, but they had been moved, scattered in odd ways, possibly by animals, possibly by time. The cause of death? Unknown, possibly exposure, possibly dehydration. But there was one other theory, darker and harder to swallow, that they had gone deeper into the woods because they were being followed. It explained the rush, the fear, the cryptic final lines in the journal. We heard voices, something's not right. It explained Rourke's paranoia. It explained why no one ever found them, not until now. But it didn't explain who buried them or why. Jesse requested a private moment at the site before they closed it. The earth was still torn, the evidence flag still in place. He knelt beside the largest stone and placed his brother's photo there. "You got so close," he whispered. "You were right there." Then he turned, walked away, and said nothing more. The bodies were cremated. The families chose not to hold 3 separate funerals. Instead, they gathered on the field where the boys had last been seen, the Bonfire field, now ringed by yellow grass and thyme. A single oak tree still stood near the edge. The initials TJI were still carved into the bark. This time, someone added below it, "Found, but never forgotten." The boys were home now, at least parts of them were, cremated, rested, returned to families who had spent 18 years suspended in grief with nowhere to place it. Now they had a place, 3 small urns, 3 names on brass plaques. The town mourned them all over again, not with the hysteria of 1992, but with a quiet that felt almost heavier, as if silence had become the proper language for loss. The kind of grief that doesn't cry anymore, just breathes slower and sinks deeper. And yet, even with their bodies found, nothing felt finished. Sheriff Holt kept her office open late every night. Her board remained covered in notes and photos. There were still too many questions, too many cracks in the story. Chief among them, who buried the boys? Who placed the rings inside the box? Who marked that map with a red X and the word safe? That word haunted her. It didn't fit. It didn't sound like something the boys would have written. It sounded like reassurance from someone else. But from who? Rachel Glenn began a timeline reconstruction, not just of the boys' final days, but of Ellis Rourke's movements as best as they could track them. The problem was that Rourke had no family, no known next of kin, no social records after 1998, no tax filings, no obituary. He had disappeared, not vanished, just faded. Holt began to believe he had died out in the woods, like so many loners who retreated into the pines and simply became part of the earth again. But a theory was not a fact, and without a body, Ellis remained a ghost too. Then, on a cold morning in December, a park maintenance worker named Leroy Finn found something. He had been clearing fallen branches near the old fire watchtower south of Hollow Pine Ridge, an area that hadn't been used in decades, when he kicked something metallic under a pile of leaves. It was a small thermos. Old, dented, the kind campers once used in the 70s. But this one had been modified. When he opened the cap, he didn't find soup or coffee. He found a tightly rolled plastic pouch with a cassette tape inside, labeled only with the year 1992. Sheriff Holt called the lab. The cassette was degraded, warped at the edges, but salvageable. They digitized it, restored it, and then played it. What they heard stunned them. A voice, male, mid-50s, nervous. It was Ellis Rourke. He introduced the tape with a quiet stammer. August 21st. If someone finds this, I need you to understand. I didn't hurt those boys. I didn't. I tried to help them. But something else was out there. There was a pause, breathing. Then, I gave them food. My flashlight, a knife. I marked a trail south, told them to follow it in the morning. But that night, the night before they were supposed to go, another pause, a sound in the background. Wind? Number breathing. Not his. They heard something. We all did. It wasn't a coyote. It wasn't wind. It was whispering, not in the trees, from the ground. I told them to stay low. I left to get my compass. When I came back, the shelter was empty. More silence. Then, with panic, I searched for days. I shouted, left notes, but the forest swallowed them. I buried what I found. I thought it was the right thing. Maybe it wasn't. I don't know anymore. They deserved better. I'm sorry. The tape ended with 7 seconds of static, and then a whisper. So faint, barely audible. One word. Run. Sheriff Holt listened to it 11 times. She couldn't tell if the whisper was real or tape bleed. But it didn't matter, because the tape did something none of them expected. It cleared the last known suspect. Ellis hadn't been a predator. He hadn't lied about the boys. He had tried, imperfectly, maybe even foolishly, to save them. And when he failed, he stayed behind and died with the guilt. The families were called in again, this time to hear his voice. Janice Mays sat with headphones on, her fingers trembling as she gripped the sides. When it ended, she whispered, "He was with them. That means they weren't alone. That means someone tried." Alan Halpern closed his eyes and nodded. "That's something." Isaac's mother said nothing, just wept. The town held a vigil for Ellis, even without a body. They placed a small plaque near the shelter's remains, in memory of a man who tried, and the boys who never stopped trying. It was simple, but enough. There were still gaps, of course. Who, or what, had been heard in the trees? Why had the boys left the shelter despite knowing the danger? Why had no one seen them on their way south? And most of all, what took them from that trail, only to bury them at the ridge? Holt had no answers, but she had peace with one thing. The boys had not run away. They had not died in silence. They had written, huddled, survived, reached for help. And even if that help failed, they were not forgotten. Weeks passed. Snow fell over the mountains again. Jesse stayed in Granger Hollow, unable to leave now that so much had been uncovered. He and Rachel Glenn created a permanent exhibit at the local library. Photos, maps, copies of the notes, a replica of the final journal page. Visitors came from neighboring counties. True crime authors reached out. Podcasts requested interviews. But the families kept it small. No interviews, no dramatization, just truth and a trail. The old path leading from the Bonfire field to the Red X Ridge was cleared, preserved, and marked as a memorial route. They named it the Trail of the Three. At the beginning, 3 wooden posts, each carved with a name. At the end, a circle of stones where their ashes had been scattered. Some nights, visitors say they hear the wind change there. Some say they hear breathing or a voice. But most say nothing at all. They just stand and remember. By spring, Granger Hollow had changed in ways that were quiet but irreversible. You couldn't walk through town without feeling it, not just in the empty school hallway where Tommy used to drift between classes with a guitar pick in his back pocket, or in the corner booth at Harper's Diner where Isaac once drew faces into his ketchup with a fry, or in the side alley behind the church where Jordan used to park his rusted pickup, tires squealing just late enough to get noticed. No, it was in the air. The stillness had a new edge to it, like the town had finally exhaled after holding its breath for 18 long years, and now it wasn't sure what to do next. People walked slower, not out of sadness but reverence. Every patch of forest seemed to hold more meaning. Kids who had grown up hearing whispered campfire stories about the missing 3 now spoke of them like real people. Not legends, not myths, just boys. Boys who laughed and ran and hiked and vanished, and then, through some terrible act of chance, were buried where no one had thought to look. What haunted the town most wasn't just the mystery, it was the closeness of it. The idea that for years, everyone had passed by trees under which the boys once walked, that all this time, they'd been there, sleeping beneath the roots, waiting to be heard again. The memorial trail became a ritual. Some walked it in silence. Others left tokens, pebbles, small drawings, school photos. One child left a baseball glove wrapped in a plastic grocery bag. Another left 3-string bracelets, each colored blue, green, and red. People made the hike in groups, in families, and sometimes alone. Even tourists came, not many, but enough that the town printed a small pamphlet, The Trail of the Three, in honor of Tommy, Jordan, and Isaac. It included their photos, a simple map, and one page torn from the old Ranger journal. The page that read, "I told them to wait near the rocks. I thought they'd be safe." The Halperns, the Mays, and the Velez families met every Saturday now. Not to mourn, they'd done enough of that, but to remember, sometimes at each other's homes, sometimes walking the trail together. They talked about the boys' childhoods, about the time Jordan got suspended for sneaking a frog into the teacher's lounge, about the summer Tommy got poison ivy on both arms and still insisted on going to guitar lessons, about the day Isaac climbed the old water tower just to tape a paper heart for a girl who never even noticed. These stories didn't bring pain anymore, not in the same way. They were the kind of ache that becomes part of the body. Like a limp, you stop noticing until it rains. Jesse Halpern had changed too. The boy who had once watched his older brother vanish into the forest without a trace had grown into a man who now led others through those same woods. He became a wilderness guide, quiet, gentle. His tours were soft-spoken and poetic. He would point out the grove of firs where the last journal was found. He'd pause by the Red X boulder and say, "They were here." They stayed together. They didn't panic. They didn't give up. People listened. Many cried. Not because they knew the boys, but because the story spoke to something universal. The fear of vanishing and the hope of being remembered. Sheriff Holt retired that summer, her office cleaned, her board cleared. Before she left, she wrote a letter to each of the families, hand-signed, each one sealed in a plain white envelope. She didn't share what she wrote, but Janice Mays kept hers tucked inside a photo frame in the living room, next to Tommy's class photo. Holt didn't take credit. She never would, but the families knew. Without her, they might never have found their boys. Without her, the tape, the shelter, the wallet in the tree, it might have all remained buried. Rachel Glenn stayed. She took Holt's place, promoted to sheriff by unanimous vote, the youngest in the county's history. Her first order of business, creating the Cold Case Archive, a digital and physical collection of every missing person, every unexplained event within a 50-mile radius of Granger Hollow. She told the town council, "We can't wait 18 years to remember someone exists. We need to remember them now." And the council agreed. There were still rumors, of course. There always would be. That the whisper on the tape was real. That the boys had seen something in the woods no one could explain. That Rourke hadn't been alone. Some even said the shelter wasn't his. That someone else had built it. Someone long gone. Someone who watched and waited in the forest. Those theories lived in the margins of message boards and small-town gossip, never quite fading. But the families didn't entertain them. Not anymore. Their boys had been found, their names returned, their story told, not as a horror tale, but as a portrait of loyalty and light in the darkest place imaginable. On August 15th, 19 years to the day since the boys disappeared, the town held a remembrance walk. Hundreds came. Candles were lit at dusk. Names were spoken aloud. At the red X, Jesse read the last journal entry again. "If someone finds this, tell them we didn't give up." Then he stepped back, and 3 lanterns were lifted into the sky, one for each boy. The wind caught them gently. They rose slow, silent, glowing like tiny stars against the purple horizon. People watched until the last point of light blinked out. A silence followed, deep, complete, but not empty, because Granger Hollow had finally finished the chapter. Not closed it, not forgotten it, but finished it. The only way it could. Together. They say the forest forgets, that if you wait long enough, even the trees let go of what they once held. But Granger Hollow learned that's not always true. Some places remember. Some places hold tight to their ghosts. And sometimes, when you're not looking for anything anymore, that's when the forest decides to show you what you missed. It was nearly a year after the boys' remains were found. A quiet September morning. Jesse Halpern had just finished his final memorial hike of the season. The air had cooled. The moss on the trail had begun turning dark again, soaking up the first hints of rain. Leaves fell gently in slow spirals, and the usual stillness had returned to the ridge. After guiding a group of hikers back to the trailhead, Jesse took one last loop through the path alone. He walked past the oak tree, ran his fingers along the carved initials, past the old campsite now fenced off gently with a wooden rail. He stopped at the ridge clearing and sat on the same boulder where his brother's remains had been buried, now marked by a bronze plaque and a ring of stones. He stayed there for hours, no reason, no plans, just stayed, thinking. That was when he noticed it. A glint of something shiny just under the edge of the dirt path near the tree line. At first he thought it was a coin, but as he got closer, he realized it was a small, crumpled piece of metal, shiny but bent. He pulled it loose. It was an old film canister, the kind used for 35mm rolls. Faded, rusty around the edges. It looked like it had been buried shallowly, then recently exposed by weather. His first instinct was to think it was trash, something lost long ago. But something about it made him pause. He didn't open it, Not right away. He brought it into town, placed it into an envelope, and handed it to Sheriff Rachel Glenn. "I don't know if it's anything," he said, "but it was right where they were found." Glenn took it seriously. Everything that touched the ridge, they took seriously now. They sent the canister to a lab that specialized in historical film recovery. It took 3 weeks. The roll had degraded badly, light damage, water exposure. But 2 frames survived. Just 2. And one of them would change the story all over again. The first frame showed the boys, all 3, Tommy, Jordan, Isaac, not standing by the fire, not laughing, sitting on the ground in the dugout shelter, huddled close. Their faces were tense, focused, not fearful, but alert, as if they were listening. Tommy held the camera at arm's length. It was a self-portrait, but not casual. It looked deliberate, intentional, a record. In the back of the frame, behind their heads, was the dugout wall, with faint scratch marks in the wood, almost words. The lab enhanced it, zoomed, one word repeated 3 times. Stay. The second photo, the one that disturbed even the analysts, was different. It was taken from outside, not a selfie, not from the boys. It showed the entrance to the shelter. The camera pointed toward it from a low angle, like someone had crouched in the trees and snapped the image from 50 feet away. The timestamp matched August 20th, 1992, the day before the final journal entry. The photo was blurry, off-center. The flash had caught a reflection. Eyes, possibly. A small dot of white above the shelter entrance. But what caught Rachel Glenn's attention most was the edge of the frame. A figure, just barely visible. Not one of the boys, not Rourke. Too tall. The proportions were wrong, elongated. The head angled low, as if the person was leaning in or watching. They ran the image through every enhancement tool they had. Still couldn't confirm if it was human or even real, but Jesse recognized the angle. He'd stood in that spot behind that tree on one of his first hikes through the ridge. "That's the north blind," he said. "Hunters used to wait there in the 70s. It's the perfect line of sight. You can see the shelter without ever being seen." The problem was that blind had collapsed in 1983, 9 years before the boys vanished, and no one had rebuilt it, not legally anyway. Rachel Glenn called it what it was, evidence of presence. Someone else had been there. That didn't mean a crime had occurred, but it meant something had. Someone else knew the boys had been at that shelter. Someone else had been close enough to take a picture, and they never came forward. That knowledge cracked something in the sheriff's office again. The case had been closed, but this reopened it. Not officially, not to the public, but to Rachel, to Jesse, to Janice and Alan and the Velez family. It reopened every wound. Because it meant the story hadn't ended at the ridge. It meant someone had watched the ending and chosen silence. Rachel debated releasing the photo publicly, but the families voted no. Not yet. Let the town heal first. Let the boys rest. But the image stayed pinned in her office, right above the line that read, August 21st. If someone finds this, tell them we didn't give up. There's a place in Granger Hollow now where the wind moves differently, where it doesn't rush or howl, but drifts like breath through a long-forgotten mouth. It's not marked on the trail maps. There's no QR code, no historical plaque. Just a ridge, a clearing, and a silence that knows its name. People still hike there, some for answers, some for closure, and some for something in between. But those who walk that path quietly, those who stand with their backs to the red X stone and close their eyes, often say the same thing. I feel like they're still here. And maybe, in some way, they are. Time moves on. It always does, but it moves differently here. In Granger Hollow, time doesn't erase, it layers. The gas station on 5th still has a corkboard with 3 faded photos pinned up under a laminated heading that says, "Never forget." The diner's menu still offers the 3 trail special. a plate with 3 items always served with a folded napkin bearing the initials TJI carved in ballpoint ink. And every August 15th, the high school auditorium fills again, not for mourning, but for remembering. Friends, teachers, searchers, and now, strangers who followed the story from far away. People who say they were changed by the boys' courage, their letters, their trail of hope. And yes, the questions remain. There's a box in Sheriff Glenn's office that no one touches but her. Inside, the photo from the film canister, the one taken from the trees, the blurry silhouette at the edge of the frame. Every so often, she pulls it out and stares at it. Not to analyze, not to theorize, but to feel. To let it remind her that even in stories with answers, there can be moments that refuse to be explained. She doesn't need to solve it anymore. Not everything needs to be solved. Sometimes presence is enough. Jesse keeps guiding hikes, but he doesn't lead them all the way to the red X anymore. He stops at the oak, tells the story, shows the carved initials, then lets people decide if they want to continue. He says the ones who go on usually walk slower on the way back. Sometimes they cry. Sometimes they just sit quietly on a rock and stare into the trees. It's not grief anymore. It's something else. Reverence, maybe. Or understanding. Or just, stillness. Isaac's family returned to Washington, but they visit once a year, always in spring. They leave flowers at the tree, blue for Isaac, white for the others. Janice Mays, now older and slower, still writes letters to her son. She never stopped. She just moved them into a new notebook, one bound in leather with a photo of the trail on the cover. She keeps it on her nightstand. Some nights she reads aloud from it, just in case the wind carries her voice. And Alan Halpern. He walks the trail every Friday, no matter the weather, no matter the season. Sometimes he carries a thermos of black coffee, sometimes a small folding chair. He sits on the ridge and watches the sky. He's not waiting anymore. He's remembering forward, letting the forest tell its story in small gestures. The rustle of leaves, the twitch of a deer, the slow creak of an old branch overhead. And if you ask him what he's looking for, I'll just smile and say, I'm not looking, I'm listening. The trail remains open year-round now, maintained by the town, respected by hikers. Children are told the story not to scare them, but to teach them about bravery, friendship, and the will to keep walking even when the map disappears. The final words of Tommy's letter, "Tell them we didn't give up," have been etched into the trailhead marker. Not in bold, not in gold, just there, waiting. There's talk of a documentary, maybe a book, but the families haven't agreed yet. They're careful. They know stories become products too easily. They want the memory to stay honest, to stay theirs. Still, journalists visit sometimes. New ones, younger ones. They always ask the same question. What do you think really happened out there? And the answer is always the same. We know enough. We know they fought to survive. We know they tried to signal for help. We know they stayed together. We know someone, maybe Rourke, maybe someone else, buried them with care. And we know that despite the wind, the fear, the miles of dark and quiet, they never gave up. That's all the truth anyone needs. But there's one more story. One last thing that only a few people know. 2 years after the memorial was completed, a ranger doing trail maintenance found something just past the red X, under a flat stone that had shifted in the spring melt. It was a tin whistle, tarnished, bent, cracked along one edge, the kind kids carried at camp. Inside it, rolled tight, a scrap of notebook paper, no date, no name, just 5 words written in blue ink. We waited, you found us.